My name is Adam Riegel, and I am a first-year MBA student at the MIT Sloan School of Management. This talk is called The All-In Bet: How Soon Can an AI Bot Become the Next World Series of Poker Champion? And I am presenting to you Nikolai Yakovenko.
Hello? Is this on? Okay, wonderful. Hi, I'm Nikolai. I'm a deep learning research scientist and, well, in a past life, a poker player. So where do we begin? I struggle with this talk because I don't think it's possible to really cover, advantage poker in 25 minutes. I mean, poker is a complicated game. It's not blackjack. And also, to some extent, this is a story of my life since 2005. So maybe I'll start with a story. For me, it all began on a underground poker club, well, overground in an apartment building on 72nd Street when I was a grad student at Columbia. Sorry. I just moved from Maryland. They had these games, and I went to this club. I mean, it was just like Rounders. It really was. I was a terrible player. I tried to win every hand. I don't think I ever didn't go all in with ace king at some point in the hand. I don't know. I read like some poker books, and what I got from it is there's two ways to win when you go all in. You can win the hand, or they can fold. And I really took that to heart. Every flush draw, I went all in for sure. Any draw, any top pair, you can't fold it because maybe the guy's bluffing. I was that guy. I remember one time I was playing, just a 1-2 game with a $300 buy-in at this club with, New York characters, and ran it up, and then played in the 2-5 game, which was a big game at the time. Got lucky. I think I won a hand when I called all in with ace king on the flop with no pair. They got a flush draw. I don't know. I felt like a genius, and I went home with $5K. I thought it was good. I came back. I lost every time after that, and eventually I ran out of money. So so then I had to wait until I started Google in the fall. And then my first week at Google, an intern told me about a club that was around the corner, and I started playing again. Somehow things were different. Maybe these players were weaker. There were Times Square characters, all kinds of the businesses you would expect there. And I think my first month I won 20 grand playing a $300 buy-in game. I don't know how that happened. So that was my introduction to poker. I guess I was hooked. And so a year later, in like 2006, it leveled up. We're playing really, really big, as you can see. So I'll just sort of go through one hand to give you a feel for the game. I'm playing with this guy, Artie. He's a, basically a KGB Teddy, more or less. I'm up a lot. I mean, I'm like, I've really run up my stack. I mean, I'm up way more that I'm really comfortable like losing, right? And Artie knows this, so that's why he's still playing. It's three-handed. I get dealt kings in the big blind, three-handed. So I raise, Artie re-raises, I 5-bet, Artie calls. And there's almost $30,000 in the pot at this point. The flop is 10-7-6 with two hearts. I have kings, right? One pair, and he goes all in for around 80,000. Yeah. So sort of to make it graphical here, just so we have like one poker hand slide, there's no more. This is the hand. Sorry for those who are not as familiar with the game, but I think most of you are. As you can see there, I have one pair, and let's just look at the odds. If he has a straight, I'm dead. That's kind of unlikely, right? If he has aces, I'm in very, very bad shape. If he has two pair, my odds actually aren't that bad because I just need to pair the board and I'll win the hand. If he has a flush draw, I'm a small favorite. And a pair and a flush draw, I'm a significant favorite. I'm something like 75% odds. Start a pair and a draw. And think about that as like something like, 10-9, right? A straight draw and a pair, something like that. There's 30,000 in the pot, about half of it mine, and he goes all in for 80. So the pot odds are 1 to like 1.4. So the math is that I would break even if I'm 42% to win against his range of hands. And the reason I'm talking about this is in poker, you can't put your opponent on a hand necessarily unless you look at the card or you have a tell or the guy crumbles the cookie or something, I don't know. but it was all rounders jokes, believe me, at the time. Anyway, so I think, as most of you who know poker would see, like, look, he probably doesn't have aces or a straight, and you're fine against 2 pair. Like, you should just call. The problem is they're going to run it out, and you're going to lose 80,000 half the time, approximately. So I thought about it, and I just didn't have the stomach to call. And what happened was, so I folded, and he showed me 2 8s. So it was exactly the final situation. I was a huge favorite. And we ran it out, and a 9 comes right away, and I would have lost. So, you know, maybe a bot could have done better. OK, sorry. And meanwhile, this whole thing is developing. You know, online poker is becoming a popular thing. I mean, as many of you know, Chris Moneymaker won in 2003 from a $25 online investment. Really increased the number of people playing in the World Series. I mean, there were up to 8,000 players within a couple of years. Poker was booming. All of it from online. And another development people weren't necessarily aware of at the time is that at University of Alberta in Canada, people had started developing poker AI and trying to be mathematical about it, not just like poker books, but actually study it with computer science. As far back as the late 90s, I think. I'm not even sure. The annual computer poker competition started in 2006, has been running through then. We have poker agents, both academic and amateurs, like myself, who would enter agents. But does it tell you how far away it was from being something that you can actually play against? I mean, in 2007, they had a match where the computer narrowly lost to humans in Limit Holdem. And Limit is, you can only bet in one amount. I mean, no limit is much more complicated. So you can imagine this academic stuff is developing slowly, but it's really not at the level where it's at all competitive with strong humans. Meanwhile, online, starting around that peak, it starts to getting like really sort of, very, very data and sort of, intelligence driven. I mean, you have people like Elke at the top there, who was who dropped out of high school in France, to move to Korea and play StarCraft in the early days. And you had all of these people who got into poker because, you can click buttons and the games were pretty easy. You had these guys, I mean, he played 30 tables a day, half the day for about 4 months. I could play like 2 or 3 tables, but I mean, 30 is, I mean, you can just imagine. Which kind of tells you that there's a strategy to it, right? Like you're not thinking. When you're playing 30 tables, you're not thinking. You're pattern matching. It's like playing 30-second chess or something. And you had the emergence of poker bots. Famous one being Coding the Wheel, because the guy just decided to publish all of it. So he would publish his code, publish his ideas. They're all off the internet now. It disappeared somehow. Well, you can find it in the archives if you want. And just the idea that people in this like fairly like heuristic-driven, non-scientific way were developing strategies that were good enough to beat really bad players probabilistically, right? I mean, that's what Elke's doing. That's what the bot's doing. And then also most of the effort, unfortunately, in poker after a while became into like not even playing well, but into finding weak players and following them around. You had these heads-up displays, or HUDs as we call them, where they would just show you just really basic stats. Sorry, the size is small, you can't really see it, but just how many hands is a player playing? How often is he raising? How often do they call on the river? So, just based on statistics like that, you can sort of tell who you're dealing with. If a player plays a lot of hands but doesn't raise a lot, it tells you how to play against that player. If a player is playing a lot of hands, first of all, they're playing a lot of bad hands. It's just statistically impossible for them not to be. But also, if they're calling a lot, maybe that's not the player you bluff. But if they're not raising a lot, it means that player doesn't bluff. So the player plays a lot of hands, but when he bets, he doesn't bluff. You can figure this out very quickly, very easily. And a lot of poker, frankly, became about just following bad players and doing really, really basic things, which is kind of unfortunate. But starting in 2007, you did have these academic things that started developing in a serious way, particularly this idea of actually solving poker as a Nash equilibrium problem, just heads-up poker. Believe it or not, it's possible. Even though the game state is huge, even for Limit Holdem, the number of game states is like 10 to the 13th. You can get close to this equilibrium by enumerating all the states, bucketing some of them, but we'll sort of get to that in a second. And then you take a random strategy, you calculate the best response, and you look at, okay, well, if I did this, I have more regret. For whatever reason, they calculated it this way. This is the way just people like to think about Nash. And the idea is then you update your weights a little bit, and you change your strategy to sort of adjust for the best response. And through not that many cycles, maybe as few as like 6 or 12 or 20 of just going through the game state, you get to a pretty good strategy that's within an epsilon of unexploitable. And of course, the key to it, as you can see, is that the player is not going to, so your opponent has a perfect response and knows your strategy, but doesn't distinguish between particular states. So if the betting is the same, and the opponent, and the board is the same, the opponent can't tell whether you have kings or jacks in the hole, right? So you have this situation where he's calculating, the opponent's calculating a best response, but to your range of strategies. And in 2014, this culminated in actually University of Alberta solving Limit Holdem. So as you can see on the chart on the right there, this is the number of game states. Heads-up Limit Holdem is about 10 to the 13th, which is a pretty big number. But that is still, you still can fit that. You can still, you can iterate over it multiple times, and you can actually, with very, very, very little bucketing, you can calculate regrets for all of those states. And they were just able to do it with like a large computer cluster, ran it for 6 months, and they got it provably within 0.1% of an unbeatable equilibrium. And kind of an interesting observation about it, as you can see on sort of the bottom right, that's your pre-flop chart, and green is raise. So if you're the first player, small blind, second to act on the left, basically the vast majority of hands you're going to raise in the Limit Holdem setting. And those really bad hands that are like deuce 8 offsuit, essentially, on the bottom, those are red, you're going to fold them all. And even though you can have a mixed strategy, the equilibrium does not have very much of a mixed strategy. On the other hand, the second player, as you see, there's a lot of blue, the player's going to call a lot. The player's going to raise his very best hands, and he's going to fold his very worst hands. And it was a little bit surprising. Like, I still almost don't quite believe that that's the case. So you would just be very deterministic about your play. And this is true after the flop as well. Just, you can't possibly visualize all the hands after the flop. And, did I not do it? Okay, there we go. All right, and then and of course, from even before then, people were trying to scale equilibrium solving to no limit hold'em, which is a much, much, much bigger game state. I mean, it's effectively infinite, just because, usually the standard is they're playing 200 big blinds deep, but that means you can bet, 1 chip, 2 chips, 3 chips, 4, 5. I mean, the branching factor is crazy if you actually consider all of them. So at the very least, you have to simplify it and say, okay, we're going to solve it in a world where you're only going to make raises of certain sizes. You have some weird all-in problems there, which is a problem even to this day. But other than that, you sort of simplify the betting. But even so, the game state is just massively bigger than Limit Holdem. You can have multiple raises, re-raises. I mean, limit is just 4 bets, and they're all the same size, a maximum 4 bets. So you end up having to do a lot of both betting and card abstraction. So the betting abstraction is obviously, what I was saying now. You just assume people are only going to bet in certain limited sizes, like, a quarter of the pot, half the pot, pot size, 2 times the pot, all the way up to all in. And then the card abstraction is, as a human, you don't think of each hand individually. You want to find similar situations and sort of bucket them themselves. And you have techniques like Earth Mover's distance, where you're not just looking at the average. The easiest way to cluster 2 hands is to say, okay, what's my average expectation against an average hand? But then you would say ace, king, and 4-4 are like similar. Or in this example, 4-4 and 10 jack are similar. And it's true, like against a random hand, they win about the same. But that's not, but they have very different distribution of like, sort of like nuttiness, like when they're really far ahead, or when they're like sort of flipping, and just looking by those buckets. That way you can use the Earth Mover's distance. But these are all heuristics. But they're reasonably effective. By 2005, it was pretty clear that these agents were getting good enough where they were, maybe on some level close to competitive with really strong human players, even for heads-up no limit. So they actually, Carnegie Mellon had a match between 4 top heads-up no limit specialists, and they lost, but fairly narrowly. I mean, 3 of the 4 humans won, and this is despite pretty brutal conditions for humans, which is playing 12 hours of poker a day for 2 weeks. And the players had some criticism of the bot. I mean, it definitely played oddly. It made certain repeatable mistakes, but the humans made mistakes as well. So the question, it seemed pretty clear that with a few improvements, the bot could probably get close to the humans. Not Pareto dominant, but could it actually beat them? And by January 2017, they did. So I attended this match, and I mean, over 120,000 hands. I mean, if you see that graph on the right, that's the bot winning. All 4 players lost. The bot won all the money. It beat all the players. It ended up winning by, I forget, but I mean, for 50, 100 blinds, I mean, something substantial like over $10 a hand. I mean, like a really significant, statistically significant edge, something like 4 or 5 standard deviations. But even early on, you could sort of tell. I mean, the players came out losing out of the gate, and they came back a little bit, but then it really wasn't all that competitive. And this is with the bot still making a lot of mistakes. What it was, though, they fixed the two holes. It's kind of interesting what they did. So the first one was they did dynamic resolving. So before, in this, if you, so in this sort of idea, you solve the whole tree. So you actually pre-compute your strategy. It takes a long time, but then you play it. The idea is you can, I don't have a slide for this, but you can actually dynamically resolve the tree. And this gives you 2 advantages. One, you can have a much bigger strategy. For example, in chess, right? In chess, no one solves every chess position. You solve it dynamically as it comes up, which is, and then the other aspect is if a player makes a bet that's between the 2 bet sizes that you expect, now you can resolve a game where that bet exists. So now you're saying, okay, now resolve the equilibrium in a world where you are allowed to bet, 60% of the pot in this particular case. So the idea is further down the tree, it doesn't matter. But what you don't want to do is if you just have a pre-computed strategy, now you have to average the strategies for someone bet half the pot and someone bet 75% of the pot, whatever your buckets are. And that doesn't work particularly well, especially if the players know where those holes are and how to take advantage of them. And then the other one was that it seemed that by using a bigger card abstraction, it was more able to handle things like card replacement. So this is like a real thing in poker. Like if I'm thinking whether you're bluffing or not, and we know we're like on the edge, as close to equilibrium, my cards have a huge impact on what you're supposed to have. Because you don't know what I have, but I know what I have. So say if I have blockers, you're less likely to have that hand. So if I don't have any hearts in my hand, and it's a situation where you might bluff all in with a flush draw, you're like significantly more likely to do it if I don't have any hearts. Because if it's like you're representing a straight, but you also could have been playing a flush draw, if I have the blockers for the straight and no hearts, it's like boom. In an equilibrium situation, I'm just calling. Like now against a human, you don't do that because humans don't bluff enough. But the bot has no fear, right? So, well, it would have played the hand better against Artie the Russian. Well, anyway, to sort of get us to the current state, there was actually 2 groups, so from Carnegie Mellon and Alberta, that were both competing for this at the same time. Carnegie Mellon, we just saw play these top 4 pros and beat them pretty convincingly. Kind of technology-wise, what they were doing is that for this resolving, they're running a 500-node supercomputer cluster. I guess Pittsburgh has a shared cluster, and people weren't able to get their protein folding that week done, or for the 2 weeks. I wanted to play against the bot. They're like, listen, you can't. It's too expensive. I'm like, fine. At the same time, Alberta, what they did instead is that they had a deep learning approach, which I'm a fan of course, where they were able to not only use GPU to parallelize this and train it with a lot less computer resources, but also when they're doing dynamic resolving, they would actually they would have the deep learning signal estimate something further down the tree. And sorry, I should have a slide about this, but like basically, you don't have to solve the whole part of the tree. You can think about it, again, like in chess, where you just cut off search after a certain point, and you say, okay, this is your lookup value. And if you can predict what those values are from previous runouts, then that's close enough. So you're only simulating the next couple rounds in the resolving tree. And that way, it's much faster, runs on a laptop. And both of these teams had a lot of respect from the community, top NIPS paper for CMU, science cover for Alberta. It's pretty cool. And okay, so let me try to answer the initial question. How close is these bots to becoming a World Series champion? Well, there's a few things that they're not doing, right? These things have definitely not met yet, like real poker, online poker, and AI poker. For one thing, the AI only plays heads up. But according to CMU and Alberta guys, they all claim that that the Nash equilibrium does work for more players, and it works reasonably well. I want to see it. No one's seen it yet, so we'll see, but they claim that that should work. Alberta has already built bots that sort of adjust to different stack sizes and play a freeze out. So that's not, all of these equilibrium so far has been accepted that every single hand is played 200 big blinds deep. Not really a real problem. The AI definitely does not adjust to opponents, but it's not clear that that's necessary to be a good or above average player. I mean, people always ask me this, like, well, the player can't, the bot's not gonna be able to read faces and stuff. I'm like, well, you don't need to do that to play well. Like, that's an advantage, that's helpful. But if you play a really, really good basic equilibrium strategy, you can de-exploit it, really. And when you're adjusting to people's faces, they could also give you a fake tell. So it would be nice, but I don't think it's necessary. And the computational resources is still a little bit of an issue, but I mean, with a GPU, I mean, you can run it in 15 seconds, so it's not necessarily that bad. Also, I should note that the Alberta lab last year became part of Google DeepMind. So with all the stuff that they're doing with chess and Go, I know that they're thinking about bringing poker into the fold. So I don't think they'll tell us, but that could be something that emerges or not. A little kind of interesting, a little bit unclear. All right, so anyway, as I was saying, like, there's just this convergence of online and poker AI. Like I said, they're still far away. One is doing heads up, fixed stack. The other one is like, tournaments, different players. But it's getting closer. I mean, AI is, once we're able to support 6 to 9 players with equilibrium, that provides a baseline. Tournament poker is basically just multiple players, slightly different reward structure. There are already poker AI bots for pot limit Omaha, which is just 4-card Holdem. And the cool thing about these games is the edge is much higher, so the bot doesn't have to be nearly as close to perfect to actually beat really good players. There's other things that are interesting, like you can play, can you build a bot that plays like a human? I don't know. I think that would be very interesting. You can definitely distill these very expensive computations to small networks. Alberta's done that to some extent. I've done some of that work myself. It's pretty standard thing for deep neural nets. Have some expensive process, collect some data. Can you generalize it, right? I mean, humans, we definitely don't have 1,000 rules, right? So maybe we don't really need to do this resolving. Like, it's a good tool. We have it available. That's the gold standard. But maybe we don't need it because it does make it quite difficult to play that way in real time. On the other hand, online poker. I mean, it's people are definitely playing an equilibrium strategy. Then they adjust to opponents. What I'm excited about is being able to use some of these bots to learn how to play poker, to practice against players. I just think that that's helped a lot for chess and other games. And obviously with money things are different, but in chess we're very comfortable playing against humans and computers. Like, as long as you know which one is which, it's better for the game. And it's definitely good to learn. And that's why I think having players that played well but made the same kind of patterns of play as a human would be interesting to learn to play poker, especially for games like PLO, which I love and I wish everyone played. But how are you going to learn without investing tens of thousands of dollars? Kind of tough. All right. Well, I want to close with this. So why is poker interesting? It's a real game that people actually care about. Like, unlike a lot of the more synthetic things. There's probabilistic information. You're talking about exploring and equilibrium and exploiting opponents, right? There's a baseline strategy and you adjust. And you're working with the computer to solve a problem. These things exist in a fake way, but in poker it's real. And also you have a lot of adversarial games. Like dealing with collusion and fish and stalking and bots and things like this. These are real things that like PokerStars has to deal with, and they have, and it's very interesting. And in the future, what happens when players can imitate? So that picture on the bottom there, that's from one of our teams at NVIDIA. Those are not real celebrities. Instead, they took photo sets of celebrities and had them create new faces that look like famous people. That's something that's happening a lot in the deep learning world, and maybe that'll happen in poker. And I want to close with just one final thought, which is, when I was at Google 12 years ago, I worked on search. I worked with some really, really brilliant people, and they've done really well. I keep track with them. And then I also was part of the Google Poker email list, which is just an email list of like 20 or so people who were good enough to be engineers at Google, in 2005, but also love poker. And those people have incredibly outperformed the smarter engineers in search. Like, these people have started billion-dollar companies. They're like senior executives. They got into Bitcoin early. There's just something about poker among competent people who aren't complete like degenerates. That not only does it create this like really fun social environment, you meet really interesting people, but there's something about people who are interested in the probabilistic sort of gambling aspect of things that seems to correlate well to other fields of endeavor. And in that way, I just think it's an interesting space to study. And one way or another, I mean, I think you don't have to build a bot, but it's been fun. I guess is all I can really say. Well, thank you.